What if the gods that ancient people worshipped were never gods at all? What if they were something that once walked among us, creatures of light and matter, flesh and code, whose memory turned to myth when the world reset itself? The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Book of Enoch named them the Watchers. Across continents and ages, every sky spoke of beings that descended, ruled, and vanished. Yet their echoes still vibrate in the stones, in our blood, in the language of stars. Tonight, we're not here to prove or to believe. We're here to remember what the earth once knew. Shall we begin? In the ancient plains of Mesopotamia, long before empires learned to inscribe laws on stone, there were stories that trembled beneath the soil, stories not written for mortals, but whispered to them. The Sumerians, whose words became the foundation of civilization, spoke of gods who came down from the heavens to shape mankind. They called them Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. Their presence was not framed as divine poetry. It was a matter of record, inscribed on clay tablets, sealed in cuneiform precision, as if they were documenting encounters, not beliefs. Archaeologists would later find these fragments in the ruins of Eridu and Nippur, describing beings who walked among kings, teaching them the order of heaven. Yet within the same line, something uneasy lingers, descriptions of beings that shone like fire and spoke words that made men tremble. Were they gods or rulers with knowledge so immense that humans could only call it divine? The texts never explain. They only tell of hierarchy, rebellion, and the creation of mankind to serve as laborers, to bear the burden of the gods. The deeper one reads these tablets, the stranger the silence becomes. In the Enuma Elish, the gods warred before man existed. In Atrahasis, they tired of toil and crafted humanity to replace them. And yet the tone is not reverent, it is factual, bureaucratic, transactional. Humanity appears as a side effect, a decision taken in council. If myths are reflections of memory, what kind of memory tells of creators who are not omnipotent, but weary, discontent, perhaps even exiled? Some scholars like Samuel Kramer and Zechariah Sitchin tried to interpret these texts through different lenses. Kramer, the academic, saw echoes of humanity's awakening, an allegory of civilization rising from chaos. Sitchin, the heretic, read them literally. The Anunnaki were beings from another world, visitors who descended upon Earth to engineer life and rule its early empires. His ideas were dismissed by academia. Yet his questions remain unanswered. Why did the earliest civilizations insist that knowledge came from above? Why did they trace their kingship not to men, but to the heavens? Whispers. At the British Museum, where thousands of fragments lie under dim light, curators have noticed something peculiar. Across unrelated tablets, separated by centuries, the same phrases appear, descending from the great ship, glistening like copper, taking the measure of the earth. These were not poetic inventions, but repeated records. Even more curious are the maps carved on clay, circular depictions of the world surrounded by what seems like vast oceans, and beyond them, unknown lands. To some, these are metaphors. To others, they hint at memories of travelers not bound by human limitations. But then comes the silence, the great forgetting. By the time of Babylon, the gods had already retreated into abstraction. The Anunnaki, once described as rulers who could be seen and heard, became remote deities dwelling in constellations. What erased their physical presence? Was it time, or something more deliberate? A rewriting of history, a purification of memory. The priestly classes rose, temples grew, and knowledge once shared became sacred property. The myths were recast, sanitized. The watchers became angels, the Anunnaki, demons. Humanity's origin was rewritten in the language of obedience. The Book of Enoch, found in fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, would later echo these same patterns. It speaks of the Watchers, beings who descended in the days of Jared, who taught humankind the secrets of heaven, metalwork, agriculture, astronomy, and who fell from grace for mingling with the daughters of men. It is a story of divine rebellion, yet it reads like a continuation of Sumerian memory. The names change, but the script remains. Knowledge from above, punishment below, silence afterward. What if both Sumer and Enoch are fragments of the same shattered mirror, each reflecting a single truth obscured by time? Ancient gods who ruled not as ethereal spirits, but as beings bound by matter, bound by consequence. Some texts even mention that after the flood, the gods ascended back to the heavens, leaving the survivors to rebuild. But flood myths are not unique to Mesopotamia. They appear in Mesoamerica, India, China, and the high Andes. Cultures separated by oceans, yet echoing the same catastrophe. Was it simply the collective memory of rising seas after the last ice age? Or a coordinated event witnessed across the world? Modern science tells us that around 12,800 years ago, at the boundary of the Younger Dryas, the Earth suffered a sudden climate collapse. Temperatures plunged, fires spread across continents, and megafauna vanished. Some scientists trace it to a possible comet impact, others to volcanic eruptions or abrupt oceanic shifts. But in nearly every mythology born from that trauma, there is mention of gods departing, light disappearing, knowledge lost. It is as if civilization had been reset, cleansed, and rewritten. What survived were only fragments, symbols, alignments, inexplicable architecture. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia mirrored the heavens with mathematical precision, just as the pyramids of Giza and Teotihuacan would later do. Why did so many ancient builders fix their monuments to the same star patterns, to Orion, to Sirius, to the Pleiades? The Sumerians said their gods came from a realm they called Anu, the sky world. The Egyptians spoke of Duat, the star path of the gods. The Maya described the road of souls, all pointing upward, all remembering something that once descended. And still, something does not align. If the Anunnaki and the Watchers were the same, where did they go? The texts do not say they died. They say they returned. But returned to where? If they were myths, why do their names persist across languages that never met? Why does the memory of beings from the sky appear in the oldest carvings, from Göbekli Tepe to the Andes, always surrounded by serpents, wings, and light? Perhaps the question is not whether they existed, but why the world was made to forget. The silence left by the Anunnaki was not empty. It was curated. Across the centuries that followed their disappearance, priesthoods rose to replace presence with ritual, turning memory into obedience. In Mesopotamia, every temple became a coded reminder of what had once been direct contact. The ziggurat, tier upon tier, echoed the idea of ascent and descent, an architecture that seemed to bridge worlds. At the top of each step pyramid, the priests waited for something that no longer returned, offering smoke and chants in exchange for a whisper from the stars. But none came. Or perhaps the voices that did were not meant for all to hear. By the time of Assyria and Babylon, the Anunnaki had splintered into a pantheon of lesser names: Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Nanna, Ninurta. The records no longer called them those who came from the sky, but gods of wind, water, love, and war, reduced to metaphors for nature, sanitized of origin. Yet, in the oldest hymns, their celestial connections remained intact. Enki, the god of wisdom, came from the deep abyss of the sky. Inanna rode the storm chariot through the heavens. These phrases linger like fossilized truth, traces of memory that resisted theological domestication. When archaeologists excavated the ruins of Nineveh in the mid-19th century, they uncovered thousands of clay tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal, a king who ruled 7 centuries before Christ. Among them were astronomical tables, star catalogues, even references to a planet beyond Neptune, what the ancients called Nibiru. Modern astronomy would not rediscover such an orbit until millennia later, when whispers of a hypothetical Planet 9 began to reappear in astrophysical journals. Coincidence or residue of an older knowledge that humanity once possessed? The more scholars translated, the less certain the picture became. One passage describes a being descending in a whirling wheel of fire, surrounded by sound and wind, an image later echoed in Ezekiel's vision by the river Chebar. Another speaks of the tablets of destiny, crystalline objects containing the commands of heaven, tablets seized, fought over, and guarded by divine beings. They may have been mythic relics, or perhaps metaphors for the loss of power, of knowledge encoded beyond human reach. Either way, the thread between Sumer and Scripture was unmistakable. Yet it was not only the Near East that remembered the sky beings. In the highlands of Bolivia, the ruins of Tiwanaku bear carvings of winged figures holding small boxes, each box radiating lines like light. In Egypt, the oldest texts call the gods the Shining Ones, who arrived in the time before the first sunrise, building with stones that could sing. In India, the Mahabharata speaks of Vimanas, chariots that flew through fire and sound, armed with weapons brighter than 10,000 suns. None of these civilizations shared a language, yet all described beings who fell from heaven, ruled, and vanished. If myth is humanity's subconscious, then perhaps these are not separate dreams, but fragments of one collective memory diffused through time, a memory of contact, perhaps not with extraterrestrial gods, but with a lost branch of humanity itself, one whose technology or consciousness was far beyond our own. Genetic studies have shown curious anomalies in human DNA, segments that appear older than our species, with no clear ancestral source. Some call it statistical noise. Others see it as a signature, an untraceable inheritance from an unknown progenitor. In 2015, a group of researchers at Harvard and MIT published findings on what they called non-human genetic inserts, sequences within our genome that resemble code fragments, self-replicating and inexplicably ordered. A handful of them align with patterns found in extremophilic microorganisms, organisms that can survive radiation, vacuum, and heat, the same conditions that would exist beyond Earth. Of course, science does not infer mythology, but mythology often encoded what could not yet be measured. If humanity was once modified, even slightly, to adapt or evolve under guidance, would we recognize it now? Some point to the sudden leap in cognition around 50,000 years ago, the so-called Great Leap Forward, cave art, symbolic burial, musical instruments, all appearing almost overnight after 2 million years of relative stagnation. Evolution does not normally leap, it crawls. Yet here, something accelerated the human mind. Could that be the first visitation, the first descent of the Watchers? Or was it the moment when the dormant code was awakened, triggered by a celestial event, perhaps the approach of a world whose orbit passes only once every tens of thousands of years? In the ancient Sumerian cosmology, Nibiru was described not as a static star, but a wandering planet, one that appears once in a great age to renew the light of heaven. The Anunnaki, the texts say, were its emissaries. The last appearance, according to some calculations, would align loosely with the onset of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, the same period that erased the first great civilizations. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps rhythm. Civilizations may be like breath, inhale, exhale, rising and falling with cosmic tides. If the Anunnaki did walk the earth, the record of their departure was buried beneath the flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known story, ends not with conquest, but with longing. A hero who seeks immortality, only to be told that it was lost when the gods retreated beyond the great waters. The flood is not merely a punishment. It is a curtain, a cleansing, yes, but also an erasure. Afterward, new kings reign, shorter-lived, smaller in stature, their reigns measured not in thousands, but in mere decades. The Sumerian king list confirms this strange compression of time. Before the flood, kings ruled for hundreds of thousands of years. After it, their reigns became mortal. This textual fracture has haunted historians for generations. Did time itself change, or merely the measure of it? Were those mythic numbers symbolic, or records from a world where cycles, calendars, even biology were calibrated differently, perhaps under another sun's influence, or within an altered atmosphere? We will never know, but the precision of those numbers, 240,000 years for Alulem, 36,000 for Enmenluana, suggests an accounting system, not invention. As the fragments resurface, the same pattern repeats. Knowledge given, rebellion, flood, silence. And here we are, still asking the same questions our ancestors carved into stone. So, tell me, do you think they'll return? Or have they been here all along, watching, waiting for us to finally remember? Leave your thoughts below, because this story, it's far from over.